Well, a very good evening to you all, and welcome to this midweek devotion, which is coming to you from Northside Community Church in Harare. And so it's Wednesday, the 18th of June, 2025. And so we are continuing with our study on Galatians, which aligns with our focus for this year of walking in the Spirit. And so this week's teaching was on Galatians chapter 2, and that was verses 17 to 21. And this was the last of 4 sermons on chapters 1 and 2. And they covered the foundations for freedom. And this is the freedom which we have because of the one true gospel of grace, which Paul received directly from Jesus himself. And so this Sunday, Gary was cementing these foundations. So not only is this the one true gospel, it is the same for everyone. It's the same for the Jews and the Gentiles. And it unites all those who believe in Jesus and his sacrificial death and resurrection, which justifies us. So tonight I'm not going to try and elaborate on the preaching on Sunday. I would encourage you, if you haven't done so, to watch it. And I'm not going to try and summarize the teaching so far. But what I would like to do is look at the Jerusalem, what is called the Jerusalem Council from Acts 15, because this covers the events of chapter 2 of Galatians. So the first 16 verses of Galatians chapter 2 are Paul's personal account of when he went to Jerusalem to meet the elders of the church there, and that's the Jerusalem Council. And so this was after 14 years of his ministry, and it was necessary because the Judaizers had come to Galatia and they were undermine his teaching, that is Paul's teaching. And so the Judaizers were Jews who had become Christians, but they taught that the Gentiles had to become Jews first before accepting Jesus. And so what they were doing is they were adding to the gospel of salvation by faith alone. So then in Acts chapter 15, this has Luke's account of this. And so Luke was a historian who spoke to many people and then recorded the history of the early church in Acts. And so the early church had come to a very critical time in its growth and in its history. In some ways you can describe it as a fork in the road. So Paul was continuing to preach the gospel of grace as he ministered to and he converted and he established churches, mainly to the Gentiles, but also to the Jews. And so this was the road that he was on. But some of the Jews in Jerusalem, those Judaizers, were not happy with this. And so they were adding to the true gospel by requiring circumcision of the Gentiles. And their influence in Jerusalem and elsewhere was growing. So they were wanting to go down another road, leading back to law and legalism. So they may have been very sincere in their beliefs, in their Jewish traditions, but there was also probably an element of them wanting to remain in control of the church. And so the threat to the church was that the one true gospel, and now I'm going to say the road to the right, gives freedom and unites. But the return to legalism, the road to the left, enslaves and causes splits. And it had the potential to destroy the church. So the threat, the issue which had arisen, was dealt with in what is now referred to as the Jerusalem Council, which is described in Acts 15. And so what happened is the apostles and the elders met together in Jerusalem, and they discussed it and then reached an agreement on the way forward. And then this agreement was formalized by way of a letter stating very specifically what was agreed, and that was addressed to the Gentile believers, but it would have been known and applied to the whole church. So that is only a very abbreviated summary of the Jerusalem Council. And so I would encourage you to read Acts 15 in parallel with Galatians 2. But the thing about it is that together these two accounts give us good guidance as how to resolve differences and also how we should live together in the church. The church is welcoming to everyone. And at Northside, we especially value our diversity. And so this does mean we have our share of differences to work through. And often with these differences there can be strong feelings involved. And so to learn from the way they dealt with this in the church, in the early church, from these two chapters. And just to summarize what happened, a big difference arose which threatened the new church. And so they sent a delegation to resolve it. And so they met in Jerusalem with the church leaders separately initially, just to report, and then to set a date for another discussion. And Paul and Barnabas gave their reports to a meeting of everyone, to that second meeting, and there were frank discussions. And then James summarized the reports, the discussion, and made a decision. And on the basis of that, the council wrote a letter with the decision, and they sent it to the Galatians. And then the final thing was that everybody abided by that decision. So that's what happened at that time. But so to consider the lessons for us today from this. So I think the first thing we can learn is when differences arise, or a difference arises, it should be dealt with and then not ignored. The way to deal with it is through discussions with the immediate parties, and perhaps with mediators if necessary. And then if it's not resolved like that, it may be necessary to meet with others, and then both sides can be presented. And as I said, there could well be very strong feelings on each side. And so it then becomes necessary to establish and agree on the facts and the truths. And so these discussions must be frank, but they must also be respectful. And then there needs to be a decision. At the Jerusalem Council, This was made by James. He was actually the brother of Jesus. He wasn't the Apostle James, who was an elder, and he was also the leader of the council at that time. And then the decision needs to be recorded, and it's communicated to all those who are necessary to be included. And once the decision is made, it must be abided by and not undermined in any way. And so those are 6 points, six ways in which we can settle differences. But just some comments. Differences should be expected. And when they are resolved, they will strengthen the church. And in all of this, the truth should not be compromised. And in the discussions, it is important for each side to hear and appreciate the other points of view. And this discussion and appreciation of different points of view, it may only take place over time. It may not just be a one-off meeting that settles things. People need to think things through. And just to say, in making decisions at Northside, what we have done is we've moved to better communication. We have moved to more discussion. And we tend to make decisions by consensus now. And we wait until we do have consensus. And consensus doesn't mean to say that there has to be 100% agreement. But once a decision is made, it is then abided by everyone. And this has made a difference in the way we do our business at Northside. And so just to say that in resolving differences, in learning to live with each other, in building on the strengths and supporting where there are weaknesses, they are all parts of living together in a family. And the church is a family. And so from these two chapters, that's Galatians 2 and Acts 15, we see how two things which could have caused a huge split in the church. The first one was the doctrinal issue, and then just the way in which that was handled and discussed and agreed and communicated, the way they were managed. It happened in a manner which grew the church. So they are examples to us today. And just to conclude, in John 17, when Jesus prayed in the Garden of Gethsemane for his disciples and believers, the one thing he prayed for was unity. And so this is clearly very, very important. So unity starts with the true gospel, but it is then dependent on believers bearing with each other despite our differences. And where there are differences, and they are there, they must be resolved. And so, with those thoughts, I can only add, it is a joy to be a part of Northside with all its diversity, and to be a part of what the Lord is doing at this time at Northside. So, we need to continue to walk in the Spirit, but we mustn't forget to be activated for growth, for service in the church. So thank you very much for joining us tonight. Keep warm. remember the prayer breakfast on Sunday morning, and then the service where we will continue with Galatians at 9 a.m. And so, good night, and God bless you all.